This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets here for you. So we had quite the rally today in the main indices in South Africa. Top 40 in the all-share, both up by 2.96% and 2.67%. respectively. But still, that still leaves them at least 26 and 27% lower on a year-to-date basis. The top 40, remember, it hit levels last seen in 2013 in Monday's session. The AGX 30, which we'll talk about in a moment, closed in the red yet again, though not as drastically lower as in the last two sessions. It is still the worst performing of the African markets to track here at the moment, down by over a third, even after the rate cut and other support measures announced by the Egyptian Central Bank. Here's what's coming up tonight. Several African nations are taking a tougher stance to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Australia announces a $17 billion Aussie dollar stimulus package to cushion the economy. And Nollywood has its eyes set on India and the United States. All right then, let's start in China, which has responded to the US government's continued restrictions on Chinese media agencies. Since December 2018, the United States government has required Chinese media organizations to register as foreign agents. It's further designated 5 Chinese media entities as foreign missions, and it's imposed a cap on the number of employees they can have. In response, China has now asked the China-based branches of the Voice of America, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Washington Times to submit information on their staff, finances, operations, and real estate holdings in China. The authorities there are also further asking that American staff members of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post notify the Department of Information of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs within 4 calendar days if their press credentials are set to expire before the end of 2020. Now, back into the African continent. States over here in Africa are taking tougher and tougher measures to try and contain the spread of COVID-19. South Africa has over 60 reported cases. It has declared a national disaster state. Schools have been closed. Gatherings of over 100 people are prohibited, and travel bans have been imposed on several countries that have been severely affected by COVID-19. With the details, here's CGTN's Julie Shire.
South Africa's coronavirus cases continue to rise. Like other African nations, it's taking no chances.
We're imposing a travel ban on foreign nationals from high-risk countries such as Italy, Iran, South Korea, Spain, Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, and China as from 18th March 2020. South African citizens are advised to refrain from all forms of travel to or through the European Union, the United States, United Kingdom, and other identified high-risk countries.
Tourism makes up for nearly 3% of South Africa's GDP. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, the sector accounted for over 1.5 million jobs in 2018.
We are running at 40 to 70% losses, which is a negative sign for actually the employees, which are the travel consultants and everyone else. And the airlines are actually empty as well, and the hotels are also empty. It's actually a disaster for our industry.
The small operations that don't have big balance sheets, they will really suffer. So I'm thinking here about the B&Bs, the Airbnbs, the small operations that don't have the ability to weather this big storm.
April is one of South Africa's busiest travel periods outside of the festive season. Large-scale religious gatherings, sporting events and festivals are being cancelled, but the industry is hoping for a pickup in domestic travel.
We were actually trying in the travel sector to encourage travelers to consider traveling within South Africa or Africa. So I think there will be that fear for a while, and maybe travelers will now actually consider to focus on local travel.
Business and leisure travel has been on the back foot since the coronavirus outbreak began in January. It's difficult to tell what the next few weeks will hold. South Africa is amidst a technical recession and will be hoping for a quick recovery from COVID-19 to be able to get back to business. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right then, so let's dig a little deeper into the issues that South Africa is facing, given that adverse economic context that it's coming from, as you heard in Julie Shire's package. Langa Madonko is the investment principal at Summit Africa. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. Langa, good to see you on the program. What sort of reactions are you getting to the restrictions that the president announced late on Sunday? We now have 61 cases in South Africa. Is there a sense that this is a proportionate response to the crisis?
Thank you, Ramah, for having me. I think the sentiment on the ground is it is a proportionate response. Some may feel that it was a little bit long overdue. They had been clamoring already on the ground that he should have instituted the travel bans as a bare minimum well after they discovered the first and then the second case. But I think the measures that have been put in place are what you would expect with the spread of a pandemic of this nature and the way that it is transmitted. I think we are seeing from the airlines a reduction in the number of people who are traveling, even domestically. And a lot of businesses are starting to institute work-at-home plans for many of their members of staff.
Right, so give us the lay of the land as far as South Africa's health sector is concerned. We'll get to the insurance bit in a moment, but is there sufficient bed capacity and personnel to handle a large-scale pandemic?
I think one of the many challenges that the government itself has cited over the years as being an area of concern has been the healthcare system. There have historically been issues where it has been highlighted that South Africa has a shortage of nursing staff and expertise in that space. There's also been an issue where there have been shortages of medication, particularly as relates to the public health sector, and how in certain instances we've had catastrophes in some hospitals linked to what should have been non-critical incidences. For example, there were deaths at Life Acid Domain, which is one of the mental health facilities. And that in of itself was deemed to be a misnomer and a misstep by the government. We do have a robust private sector in the healthcare space, but also it's rather mispriced for what the majority of the population can afford. And also our penetration levels in terms of medical aid are not as high to cushion people in this time. I think one of the memorings that has already come out is how a lot of people are looking to do voluntary testing for COVID-19, but are finding that the pricing around that is prohibitive. Also, we are noticing that in some remote parts of the country, or rather rural and peri-urban parts of the country, there's probably what would be deemed insufficient infrastructure, as many of the private healthcare operators run what are relatively small hospitals. But I think there have been enough sites and measures that have been identified for treatment and testing based on where we currently sit in terms of the coronavirus, though.
When you say that the price of these tests are found to be restrictive, how much cash are we talking about in rand terms?
Well, in some instances, I've heard that they are pricing as high as 3,000 rand per test, which is extremely prohibitive if you consider that that is just slightly below the set minimum wage in the country. So if you also then take into account how much those who are on social grants earn, that is 3 times what they're making on a monthly basis for the elderly as well, thereabout roughly. So that's why we deem it to be prohibitive, especially if you take into context how many members of the population actually fall into those 2 brackets.
Right, and just for context for international viewers, that works out to something close to about $150. Tell me, how are private medical insurers, though, responding in general to this entire crisis? Because obviously there's going to be enormous demand for certain services to come through in the next 2, 3, maybe 6 months. Will they cover the costs of tests and treatment for their clients? Or are they saying, look, this is a pandemic, the WHO has declared it to be one, that falls into one of those act of God clauses, therefore we're not paying?
So as of today, the government is in negotiations with the medical practices and the healthcare outfits that are in the country around how to deal with this collectively in terms of offering services. I think there is a feeling that this should be something that is deemed a national imperative and everybody should come to the party. There has been a propensity historically from insurers in South Africa when certain events take place to play the uninsured, uncovered, rather the uncovered card, where they will say this is a pandemic and therefore it is uninsurable. But I think right now, based on where we are statistically, in terms of the proportion of cases to the proportion of the population, it has not yet reached the point where any of the providers have come out or has been cited as having come out and said will not cover this situation. But in of itself, though, like I said earlier, a large proportion of the population is basically not covered by medical aid or by any medical insurance. So in of itself, therein lies a significant part of the weakness. It will have to be concessionary with the healthcare providers being willing to then look at this and say, how do we deal with it outside of the ambit and parameters of medical healthcare insurance.
Right, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Langa Madonko, as always, good to have you on the programme. Now, still in South Africa, as the country's travel bans, which you mentioned a little earlier, continue to take effect, the country's finance minister, Tito Mboweni, has reminded everyone at a briefing in Tshwane that global liquidity is absolutely critical now and at least for the foreseeable future to keep economies around the world moving.
As far as the banks are concerned, banks, as you know, are critical to our economic system, both in deposit taking and lending. They provide mortgage bonds and other forms of financing. So a conversation needs to be had about what to do in the times of crisis. Let's assume a number of workers are unable to go to work for one reason or the other, but they have a bond with a bank. What does that mean? It's a conversation to be had, not to force ourselves on them, but to say, let's have a conversation about all those things. So I think that kind of conversation is necessary. I suppose our primary objective at this moment is that the economy does not grind to a halt. It must continue to operate.
The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa says it's assisting a number of African member states to develop policies that will lead to stimulus packages eventually for enterprises in emergency moments like what we're facing right now, a COVID-19 pandemic. This comes as many enterprises across the continent are struggling to deal with the disruptions caused by this pathogen around the world. CGTN's Coletta Njohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Some developed countries are developing brakes on tax, rent and utility payments to their citizens to cushion their economies against the impacts of COVID-19. In Africa, however, the UN Economic Commission for Africa says this will be slow. Nigeria's central bank says it will not hesitate to apply additional measures to shield its economy. In Kenya, the private sector is demanding for tax breaks and tax refunds to domestic businesses. In South Africa, on the other hand, the government says it is consulting with businesses and relevant institutions on what measures to apply. The UN says small and medium entrepreneurs are worst affected.
For the continent, some of these supply chain disruptions, as we call them, are just beginning to become more and more evident. And one of the things that we're looking at is, first of all, most of them owe money to the banking sector, whether there could be some rescheduling of their small and medium enterprise loans, so that as opposed to them sort of paying it next month when they haven't had any real activity, you can do that.
Vera Songwe says most African countries have not designed their financial systems to offer emergency economic mitigation.
In many of our countries, we don't really have good bankruptcy laws. And so it makes it very difficult for you to fold out when it's not your fault. And you cannot take insurance on that. And I think when we work on doing business, the doing business environment in many countries, we're insisting and supporting the fact that countries put in place these kinds of laws, because that's the way then that you can actually provide stimulus and reschedule the loan through the banking sector or through non-financial banking institutions.
The African Union says the African Continental Free Trade Area will offer solutions to such shocks, but it is yet to practically come into force.
The AFCFTA would make it easier for us to trade among ourselves in terms of the agricultural products, and in this case, in terms of the food. It offers an opportunity for us probably to reduce the heavy dependence that we see in the pharmaceuticals, because it would be possible now by the regulatory reforms and the reforms that countries are going to take for us to see more trade and production of pharmaceutical products within the continent.
Economists warn that a projection that the continent would grow at 3.2% in 2020 will not be realized. The COVID-19 impacts will force it to grow at less than 2% during this period. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's start our company news wrap in the petrochemical sector. Sasol is preparing for South Africa's biggest single rights issue in 2 decades. The group is looking to raise about $6 billion by the end of 2021 through a range of initiatives. At the moment, it's battling to service a $10 billion debt load because of a US chemical project. Just last week, it was hit by the sharpest slump in oil prices since 1991, and that came days after Moody's downgraded the company to junk. Still in South Africa, Taste Holdings says it's planning to voluntarily liquidate its food business after a failed attempt to offload its Domino's Pizza franchise. The wind-up will see about 770 employees lose their jobs. And remember, this is in a country where the unemployment rate is about 30%. Last November, Taste announced it was shifting focus from fast food to luxury goods. It has since sold its Starbucks license, as well as the Maxis and the Fish and Chips company. Workers at Amazon warehouses in the United Kingdom are being told to work overtime to tackle huge demand due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Retailers are currently struggling to keep food and hygiene items in stock as panic buying shoppers clear out shelves altogether. Demand for home delivery has also gone right through the roof, with huge numbers of people placed on lockdown right across the globe. And finally, by the end of May this year, numerous airlines worldwide could be bankrupt. As according to an analysis by the Center for Asia-Pacific Aviation, it says the only way to avoid such a catastrophe is for governments to work in coordination instead of only protecting the players that they back, essentially the ones they own. The airline industry has been one of the biggest casualties so far of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Egypt's central bank cuts policy rates by 300 basis points to tackle the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. And a blaze has destroyed parts of the Table Mountain National Park in Cape Town. We'll show you the damage when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest minds in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Nigeria's central bank has announced a raft of measures that are aimed at dealing with the damage the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to have and is already having on its economy. The CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, announced, for one, a reduction in interest rates in some of the CBN's credit lines, down from 9% to 5% for the next 12 months. With the details, here's CGTN's Deji Batmos.
With central banks across the world taking action to shield their economies from taking too much heat from the COVID-19 pandemic, the Central Bank of Nigeria has joined the fray, with the governor announcing a raft of measures targeted at farmers, businesses as well as SMEs who are beneficiaries of the Apex Bank's loans amounting to over $8 billion.
Any intervention loan currently under moratorium are hereby granted additional period of moratorium of 1 year. Accordingly, participating financial institutions are hereby directed to provide new amortization schedules for all facilities for their beneficiaries. Interest rates on all applicable Central Bank of Nigeria intervention facilities are hereby reduced from 9% to 5% per annum for 1 year, effective March 1, 2020. The CBN hereby establishes a facility through National Microfinance Bank to the sum of about 50 billion naira for households and micro, small and medium enterprise-sized enterprises that have been particularly hit by COVID-19, including but not limited to hoteliers, airline service providers, healthcare merchants, and etc.
Businesses in Nigeria are coming under severe pressure as the coronavirus spreads across the world, with Nigeria recording 3 confirmed cases. The central bank is now asking deposit money banks in the country to restructure the loans of individuals and businesses.
The CBN hereby grants all deposit money banks leave to consider temporary and time-limited restructuring of the tenor and loan terms for businesses and households most affected by this outbreak of COVID-19, particularly the oil and gas, agric, manufacturing.
The central bank's measure will no doubt come as a relief for businesses that have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. And the bank says it is ready to do even more should the need arise.
The CBN stands ready to provide liquidity backstops as and when required in view of its role as banker to the federal government and lender of last resort.
But beyond those measures taken by the central bank, Nigeria is still reeling from the collapse of oil price, which is, of course, making the implementation of the country's budget very difficult. The president has been holding a series of meetings with his economic team to come up with a solution. So everyone is waiting to see what that solution would be and how impactful it will be as well.
Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Speaking of central banks, Egypt's central bank has also cut its policy rate by 300 basis points. That brings the overnight deposit rate down to 9.25% and the lending rate down to 10.25%. The decision was made at an unscheduled MPC meeting. It's part of a broader range of measures aimed at dealing with economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Adel Mahrouki with the details.
With Egypt's rather surprising huge rates cut, the overnight deposit is down to 9.25% and the lending has become 10.25%, the lowest since 2016. A cut with that magnitude will lower the cost of financing for the domestic economy and makes policymakers breathe as they deal with the repercussions of COVID-19.
It could help some companies to survive for a while. It could help the country, for instance, for its deficit, for its fiscal deficit.
The rates cut could also help the government manage inflation to remain within the projected single-digit range. But as foreign outflows appear inevitable given the global circumstances, critics fear more downsides to the Central Bank of Egypt's decision.
It will have a negative effect as well on depositors, on people who invest their money in banks, in time deposits, in certificates of deposits. It will hurt them and it will decrease their capacity to spend, and this could create stagnation. That's dangerous. And recession. It will limit our ability to sell treasury bonds and bills, and I think it will affect negatively as well the foreign exchange reserve, because when we sell this, these are transfers which comes to Egypt converted to pounds.
After selling only 1/3 of its targeted treasury bonds and bills last week, the central bank added 67 points to its yields this week. The auction took place hours before the rates were cut. The government then cancelled its 4 billion Egyptian pounds auction of 3 years bonds and reduced its 7-year offering by 2/3. The CBE wants to deploy stimulus in the Egyptian market. With it, however, it's decreasing the chances of selling debt tools. Egypt remains offering one of the highest yields in the world, but the fears from COVID-19 appear to be bigger from what the country is offering. Adel Mahrouki, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's talk about this in a bit more detail. Adele joins us now, in fact, live from Cairo with a bit more detail. So, Adele, let's start with the equities market. The EGX 30 definitely not having a good start to 2020, down by over 30% so far in the year. What parts of the economy do investors expect to be hit hardest, aside from tourism? Because we know that's definitely going to be hit particularly hard.
Well, if you take a look at the stock market, there isn't really an exception. All markets have been equally falling and...
Well, unfortunately, we're having problems with that particular link to Adele over in Cairo. Let's proceed now to Zimbabwe. The country's managed float exchange rate system is yet to kick in as the official bank rate remains essentially unchanged. Zimbabwe's new trading system does allow foreign exchange to be traded relatively freely among banks. In the past, the central bank played a part in determining the exchange rate, but now its role will only be limited to injecting currency into the market when necessary in order to stabilize the dollar and smooth out volatility. CGTN's Farai Mukutuye reports from Harare.
The new trading system is meant to give banks more say in determining rates and to do away with the inefficiency of the central bank managed platform that had fallen far behind the market.
Just imagine somebody who has already had the indication that this is where government is taking us to, and right now the interbank exchange is at about 18.6 thereabout. So obviously you would push to get money at 18.6, anticipating that when this liberalization comes, you might actually get a rate of 1:40.
But so far there's been no movement as banks are yet to commence trading, a delay that's created further arbitrage opportunities.
The variance between the interbank and the parallel market is widened by controls. So when you lift control, you find a bit of convergence.
Some have questioned if the central bank will be able to intervene to stabilize the currency when required.
And when you look at how these things have been working out and ask yourself, do we have that capacity? If it was there, why were we not even using it to stabilize the interbank? It's just a matter of semantics. the interbank was technically managed to float.
The latest move is part of reforms aimed at restoring trust in the Zimbabwe dollar and keeping inflation in check. However, they've had limited success, as many citizens here still hold bitter memories from lost savings after the collapse of the local unit in 2008.
Anyone who is holding a bond beyond what he wants to spend, if you're in your right sense of mind, you want to convert that into the USD, which is a store of value function of money. So until we address the issues of confidence building, and unfortunately you can't have the same players who are at the face of loss of confidence then presiding over a confidence building mechanism. So there may be need of shifting even bodies in there to back up the good policies.
Zimbabwe's economic plans have recently been derailed by rising inflation, whose annual official rate was 540% in February. Farah Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
All right, then let's revisit an earlier story. As we mentioned earlier in the bulletin, Egypt's central bank has rolled out a bunch of measures to support the North African economy as it's essentially dealing with economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. But the stock market over there is sending a very different signal. CGTN's Adel El Marouki is now joining us now from Cairo yet again, who cleaned up this signal. So let's take it again from the top, Adel. The EGX 30, as you mentioned earlier, that has fallen by over 30% so far in the year. And investors seem to be generally concerned about every single company being affected. Why?
Well, basically, first of all, tourism is being hit extremely hard. There is an expectation of about $630 million monthly if the lockdown, the flight lockdown, as we're seeing that is spreading all over the world, continues. That's the biggest sector that will be hit from that economy. And also exportations of Egypt are getting another blow as global trade in general is getting affected. With the global trade, of course, the revenues from the Suez Canal are being hit. With the shutdown of the Gulf region, Egyptian expats who are in Egypt cannot go back, and there's a huge movement all around that makes increased risk, and therefore remittances could be affected. So in that sequence, it seems that there is sort of a snowball that might get affected once the shutdown that we're seeing continues. In Egypt, it's only for 2 weeks until the 1st of April, but there has been some hints from ministers in the cabinet that they might extend this shutdown, the gradual shutdown, if the situation requires it. And in general, they don't believe that there will be any significant progress in the COVID-19 file within the next 10 days, and therefore all signals a big hit, while the stock market, as you said, has been bleeding the biggest since the 2008
It does seem that link certainly has problems right across the board. That was Adel Marouki there live in Cairo. Now, on to South Africa, where mop-up operations are still underway in Cape Town after an enormous fire swept through Table Mountain National Park. Strong winds and high temperatures fueled the spread of the fire, destroying vegetation and property too. CGTN's Travis Andrews filed this report.
It's taken more than 200 firefighters to bring a massive fire at the foot of Table Mountain under control, and these are just some of the results. The battle against this blaze has been costly indeed, which include injuries that have left some firefighting personnel in hospital needing medical care. Others, though, are still putting out the hot spots.
With a strong southeasterly wind, it was fanning this fire tremendously. As you can see, it jumped over Kloofneck Road onto Signal Hill, across Lions Head and down to Netterton Street. Also the section that they call the Glen between Camps Bay Drive and Lower Clover Road, that section is also affected.
And all these are sections of the mountain range frequented by locals and tourists. No lives were lost though, as people were led to safely quickly enough.
It's very dry and we're dealing with a lot of mopping up operations, obviously with a lot of tree stumps that will need a lot of cooling down, and I think it will take a considerable time to extinguish this fire.
The fire caused extensive vegetation damage and at one stage even threatened the Table Mountain Cableway Station, which is a key tourism drawcard. And it came this close to going up in flames as well, if not for the firefighting assets making their way to the scene quickly enough. But other structures weren't so lucky.
We didn't have really aerial support due to the high winds. And the guys worked tirelessly to save numerous properties. Yes, we had a couple of properties that was burned down, but and a couple of properties that was damaged, but they managed to save quite a few properties as well.
For now, though, the fire may be largely under control, but many believe it's left a scar on a mountain that was voted as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
At 18:35 GMT, you're watching Global Business. We're back with more news very shortly.
No war, no one again, he can hold in guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Ucheopo, reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Here's a run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. The number of coronavirus cases in Ethiopia is now at 6. The latest patient is a 59-year-old British diplomat who came in from Dubai. In addition to this, there were 2 other Ethiopian nationals and 3 Japanese nationals, all of whom tested positive for COVID-19. Ethiopia has quarantined over 100 people as we speak, including those believed to have been in contact with patient 0. Ethiopia has also banned essentially all public events. Over in West Africa, in Ghana, the government has closed down all public and private schools in a bid to contain the spread of COVID-19. The country has recorded 6 cases so far. Health officials say all cases were imported. The government says it is restricting people from countries that have recorded more than 200 cases of COVID-19 from coming into the West African gold and cocoa producer. And finally, across the entire continent, over half of the countries now have reported confirmed cases of COVID-19. Northern Africa has the highest number of cases. In Western Africa, confirmed cases have also gone up a bit. Rwanda has the highest number in Eastern Africa as a region. The nation did close schools and places of worship soon after its index case was reported. South Africa has the second highest number of cases on the continent, and it has declared a national state of disaster. That's a run through your headlines. On the international front, the Australian government is focused on reducing the economic damage from the COVID-19 pandemic. But the Reserve Bank of Australia is warning that a swift recovery is very unlikely. With the latest, here's CGTN's Greg Navarro.
The picture the Reserve Bank of Australia here in Sydney is painting of the economic impact from the virus as well as the expected recovery is very troubling for businesses and investors. The primary goal of the RBA is to keep the nation's economy here from slipping into recession, something that has not happened in nearly 30 years. Now, the RBA cut interest rates earlier last month, and it is expected to do so again later on this week in an emergency meeting down to a new record low of 0.25%. It has also been buying up bank bonds in an effort to basically pump money back into the economy as an increasing number of businesses and families are struggling. Now, from an economic perspective, fear usually has the worst impact on markets, and that has certainly been the case over the last several days and several weeks here. The federal government is also trying to do its part, announcing earlier a federal stimulus package of more than 17 billion Australian dollars. It is reportedly considering another stimulus package as well. Now, one thing working in Australia's favor in all of this is the Australian dollar, a floating dollar, which economists will tell you that serves as sort of bumpers to help cushion the economic blow. At the moment, it is hovering down around the 61 US cent mark, and that is helping somewhat. However, many economists believe not even a floating dollar will help to keep Australia from slipping into recession, as economies from around the world are also dealing with the impact from the coronavirus. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
China's advanced medical companies have been taking part in the struggle against the coronavirus pandemic in their homeland, and some are now preparing to take that fight to other countries as well. Chen Tong filed this report.
Shanghai-based medical research firm Mission Jing began developing its COVID-19 test kits during the Spring Festival. And they say the kits provide results in only 1 hour and a half. It's now making plans to export the kits to Europe and the US markets as soon as they get approval there. That could take another month or two.
The Chinese government did a fantastic job in containing this epidemic spreading or infect more people. So that's why this kind of like market comes down very quickly, because it's no patients, there's nobody's going to use this test, right? So, however, in Europe, the patients' number is growing day by day. That's why we are trying to get approval from the Europe, which is called CE approval, and also the American market, which is FDA approval.
The number of the confirmed coronavirus cases outside China is now greater than the number in China. And some of the country's other advanced medicine producers are also preparing to export their products to contain the virus internationally.
Shanghai Pharma has played a bigger role in the fight against the epidemic. The company's board secretary Chen Jingzhu says, while the situation in China has been improving, Shanghai Pharma will work closely with the government to supply overseas aid.
We will definitely coordinate with the government if there is a need to help foreign countries. But there are different registration requirements in different countries, so it's hard to ship our medicines overseas immediately. But so long as different countries are cooperating, we will ensure our supplies.
While China's more advanced medical firms are preparing for export approvals, a number producing more basic medical supplies are already shipping them to countries including Italy, Serbia, Spain, and Germany. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Shanghai's Disney Resort has partially resumed operations after a 6-week shutdown. Some of the resort's facilities have reopened with limited capacity and reduced hours of operation. Shanghai Disneyland itself does remain closed. Zhang Xishuan now reports.
It's 12:30 p.m. and I arrived at the Shanghai Disney Resort at 11 this morning. During the past hour, I've seen around 90 visitors have arrived at the entrance, while normally thousands of people were coming each day before the outbreak.
Every guest entering the resort is required to have a temperature check and to show their health QR code when entering restaurants. The resort is taking a wide range of health measures to protect visitors. Anywhere having frequent contact with visitors, like escalators and park benches, are disinfected twice a day, and once again after the resort closes. Bathrooms are disinfected every 2 hours, and all air conditioners are disinfected every week.
Please wear a face mask at all times and maintain good personal hygiene. Respect personal space.
In Disney Town, shopping venues as well as caterers like the Cheesecake Factory have reopened.
The children are very happy to get out after weeks of staying at home. We've been to the Disney store and finally came here for lunch. Usually we spend around 1,000 yuan on each trip, and it's 500 to 600 for the lunch here.
Walking around the town, you find that most of the visitors are in this store, searching for things like toys. Almost everyone leaving is carrying a shopping bag, and some even had a shopping list with them when they walked in.
My friend is a nurse, and she's been sent to Wuhan. I come here to buy the new Sakura series for her, with toys, clothing, badges, and key rings. It cost me 400 yuan.
I bought a card set for 180 yuan. Coming here makes me feel great.
Still, the Walt Disney Grand Theater and Shanghai Disneyland remain closed. The company says a 2-month closure of Shanghai Disneyland and Hong Kong Disneyland will result in a total loss of $175 million. And experts say it will take a while for all this to come back to normal, because of the change in people's habits during the coronavirus period.
People all know that Disney has a limited capacity, and that normally people might need to queue for 2 or 3 hours. And now people may not feel safe doing that. Things are better in the country parks, where visitors are closer to nature. Some people have been stuck at home for nearly 2 months, so they prefer traveling to destinations with wider views and with healthier things to do, like walking or riding.
There are analysts who are suggesting the theme park should begin taking advantage of new technologies like virtual reality and live streaming to hand on to potential customers.
We have seen many examples of museums. They use an online channel to do streaming with consumers, and they introduce their museum activities and interaction with consumers online. I think theme parks may learn from these examples, be connected with the young people, and strengthen the attractiveness of their IPs.
As of Monday morning, 69 of Shanghai's scenic spots designed as A-level by the National Ministry of Culture and Tourism have reopened. Zhao says theme park operators need to do what Disney is doing, focus on providing a safe and healthy environment to help consumers regain confidence in going to public places. Experts say visitors will come back, but only step by step. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Let's face it, you and I aren't going to be going to the cinema anytime soon, at least not in the next 3 months, which explains what's happening in the next story. America's oldest film studio is now using this pandemic as an opportunity to experiment with what many believe is the inevitable future of how films and even TV shows are going to be distributed. Universal Pictures says it will release a number of its newest films directly on on-demand services like Comcast, Apple and Amazon as soon as this Friday. Consumers will be able to rent the films for 48 hours at a suggested retail price of about $20 US.
NBC Universal's decision upends the traditional practice of keeping a movie exclusively in theaters for what is typically a 90-day window before releasing it on other platforms.
Anywho, what Poppy and Branch didn't know was
the first film to be released will be the DreamWorks animation film, Trolls World Tour, set for release in the United States on April 10.
Each for a different type of music. Rock, country, techno, classical, funk, and hip-hop.
NBC Universal said it will continue to monitor the evolving state of the coronavirus epidemic and revisit its decision when the situation changes. Many cities in the U.S. have shut movie theaters and shops in response to concerns over the coronavirus outbreak. On Sunday night, the mayors of New York and Los Angeles ordered movie theaters in their cities to close. According to Universal, recently released films including The Hunt, The Invisible Man, and Emma will be available from its sister companies Sky and Comcast, and on a variety of on-demand services. In the past week, North American movie box office sales hit their lowest levels in over 2 decades, as viewers stayed home and theaters capped their seating capacity to create more space between moviegoers. Li Chong, CGTN.
All right, then just before we get into commodities, a focus on a developing story. Cameroon this time round. Like many other countries around the world, it's now closing down its borders. The West African nation, the Central African nation rather, is saying that schools across the country will also be shut down. It has placed a ban on gatherings of more than 50 people as it continues the fight against the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Cameroon did record its 10th case of the disease today. Just to recap that story, Cameroon has essentially closed down its borders. The Central African nation is saying that schools across the country will also be shut down. It's also imposed a ban on gatherings of more than 50 people as it continues the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Its 10th case came up today. All right, then, I'll run through commodity prices here for you. So Brent futures at least 0.5% lower at 15.44 GMT. 29.80 was the price at that point in time. That brings the year-to-date decline to, frankly, an eye-watering 53%. It's been a while since I actually read something like that on this program. The last time was around 2014. And this, remember, is happening as Saudi Arabia ramps up exports to 10 million barrels a day in May, according to Bloomberg data. Now, spot gold also does seem to have found its feet, at least for the time being, around 15.30 an ounce. It was 1.6% higher earlier today, but essentially that does put it back to where it was at the start of the year. So that flight to safety rally, all those gains completely wiped out. Here's what's coming up next. Nigeria's Nollywood has set its eyes on India and the United States for future growth.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Nigeria's film industry is looking to expand its horizons by collaborating with other large film markets in India and the United States. Filmmakers and distributors from Nollywood are keen to expand their reach to a much bigger, more diverse global audience while creating lucrative opportunities for filmmakers at home. CGTN's Phil Ihaza reports from Abuja on Grassroots tonight.
I'm Mabel King.
Nigeria's Nollywood industry has produced movies that have grossed over $1 million.
But that's small compared to other industries like Hollywood, where one movie can make more than $2 billion. Nollywood filmmakers are now looking to collaborate with the likes of Hollywood and Bollywood to produce movies that can have a wider reach and gross more in earnings.
One of the advantages of foreign partnership is that it gives you new audiences. When the film comes out, the Frenchman will want to watch the film. Not necessarily because it's a fantastic film from Nigeria, but he want to watch it because there is somebody who is from his locality there who is in that film. So naturally, he wants to see that film. Action!
According to UNESCO, Nigeria's Nollywood produces an average of 1,500 movies per year, making it the second most prolific industry in the world after Bollywood. But many of the Nigerian-produced movies are not internationally recognized. Experts say with more financial assistance from government and private bodies, filmmakers can create higher quality films that can compete in global stages, like winning its first ever Oscars.
Our financing is very, very poor. You know, we only finance films either getting money from the bank, Bank of Industry, CBN, or you get from friends and family. But these monies now are monies that are being given for you to pay back with interest. There should be a special fund where people who have these kind of stories could access and make films that could represent the country in the Oscars.
Will you marry me? The government has ordered the release of about $20 million to creative industries, including its film sector.
Filmmakers say Nigeria could take advantage of its huge population with 500 languages and 250 tribes to tap into unique and diverse stories. They say with more collaboration and investment coming into the sector, the industry could grow by leaps and bounds. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
All right, then, a developing story that we're keeping a close eye on in Cameroon. The Central African state has essentially shut down its borders. Schools across the country are essentially going to be closed as well. The country has also placed a ban on gatherings of more than 50 people as it continues to implement measures to fight the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The country did report its 10th case of COVID-19 today. We'll keep you posted on that particular story. A quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. The mid-16s, that seems to be where the rand has found its footing after an 18% slide so far in 2020. The rand is about 0.6% weaker against the American dollar at 1600 GMT. Now, we've spoken throughout this bulletin about the decisions that Egypt's central bank has taken, but there are two more rate-setting meetings on our radar this week and the next. SARB's next rate-setting meeting is taking place in 48 hours. Kenya's Monetary Policy Committee meets on Monday, the 23rd. So what mix of fiscal and monetary support measures can you expect from both economies? Keep it here. We'll give you all the latest details as we get them. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last 60 minutes. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.